Okay, so welcome everyone. I want to start off by thanking each of you for coming today. Your presence is helping us stay connected and keeps important information flowing. Events like this are made possible through our CMPE members and foundational partners. So if you're a member, thank you. If you are not, please consider joining. Membership helps support events like this, and all you have to do is go to cmpe.org to sign up. So that's my last commercial, I promise. We talk a lot about transparency and collaboration, and CMPE believes in both of these ideas, but it also takes enormous effort and commitment to do this well. This conversation is part of that effort, and your presence is part of that process. We're here today to get an update on how the historic American Rescue Plan funds will be flowing to and through our community over the next couple of years. In just a moment, Eric Burnett will give us that update, but first I want to walk you through a few logistics. This meeting will be recorded so that those who can't join us will have an opportunity to hear the update, and we'll post the recording on our website. So please encourage those who couldn't be with us today to check that out. And because there's such a large number of people attending today, we're asking everyone to stay on mute. So if you'll check your little mute button, if you're not on mute, we ask that you do that. And feel free to start putting your questions and comments in the chat as Eric goes through his presentation. We will monitor it as we go, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. And as you may know, CMPE is committed to ensuring that our programming reflects the diversity of organizations in our community and the people in them. To that end, we need to understand and monitor who is participating in programs like this. So I'm going to ask Merv if he will go ahead and put up our very short demographic poll. And if you would, please fill this out. And it just takes like 30 seconds. Scroll down and be sure that you get all the questions. And we're doing this because this data will help us develop a deeper understanding of which voices we are attracting, and perhaps more importantly, which voices we are not. Rest assured, this poll is anonymous, and any reporting using this data will be in the aggregate only and will not contain any personal identifiable information. So Merv, I'll let you tell me when you think we've captured enough folks. Okay, we have with us today from the mayor's office, Eric Burnett. Eric is a senior policy advisor at Louisville Forward, Metro Government's economic development agency. He is also part of the new Louisville Accelerator team, which will work with city agencies, Metro Council, and other partners on establishing priorities for the American Rescue Plan funds. Eric will go through his presentation, and then we will open it up for questions. And Eric, I just want to say to you, because I know how busy you are and that you got a lot on your plate these days, and I just want to thank you, personally, thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. It's really important that we share this information with as many people as we can. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. So happy to do that. So happy to be here with you all, and thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. I'm doing that very 2020 thing of working from home again.
Yeah.
Okay, can everybody see that? Yep, all right, great. So as many of you know, Louisville has received $388 million from the American Rescue Plan, the Biden stimulus plan. Actually, I should caveat that we've received half of the $388 million. The other half should come next year, although Republicans in Congress have been making some noises about clawing back some of those funds. So hopefully they don't do that, and hopefully we get to keep the whole $388 million. But at any rate, we think we're going to have $388 million, and we have outlined the following guiding principles for figuring out how to use the funds: focusing on community priorities, ensuring equity, collaborating for maximum impact, which is where a lot of you all come in, being ambitious but realistic, listening to experts, data and evidence, managing for results, and being good partners. Again, that's where a lot of you all come in. Right now, we've been in a community input phase over the summer. So Metro Council's Budget Committee has had a public hearing. and 3 community public meetings. So there was one in East Louisville, one in South Louisville, one in West Louisville. They just wrapped up those last week. Louisville Metro Government has had an input form. And we've also had input from lots of organizations and individuals. So all told, we've had comments from more than 2,000 residents and 50 organizations. And as we've been getting all this community input, the following thematic areas have emerged: homelessness and affordable housing, economic opportunity and broadband, healthy neighborhoods, public safety, youth development and education, arts, culture and tourism, and environmental justice and sustainability. Now, if any of you were involved in the Build Back Better Together process last year, you might recognize a lot of these themes. And that's because we, in a sense, Louisville had a lot of these conversations a year early. So we were already having these conversations as part of our COVID recovery effort that's then over the course of 2020 kind of morphed into a racial justice conversation. And so we've already laid a lot of really good groundwork in community with these themes, but these are not set in stone. So this is where I ask, do you agree with these themes? And is there anything missing? And if you want to put your comments in the chat, we can aggregate those as we go along. Eligible uses of ARP funds. So when we first got the announcement that we were going to get this money, it seemed very, very, very flexible and like we would be able to essentially treat it like general fund money and essentially do whatever we wanted. That is not how it turned out. So the the ARP money actually ended up being more restrictive in some ways than the CARES Act money from last year. And there are some new things that we're able to spend money on that we couldn't last year, but even those things have very high reporting thresholds. So there are a couple different areas of permissible spending under the ARP. One is containing COVID-19 and you know, kind of the bread and butter public health, addressing the pandemic stuff. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think I was going through eligible uses of ARP funds. So the first one is kind of bread and butter public health stuff. Then there's an economic hardship category. So this would be for people who've been disproportionately impacted by the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the funds could go to cash assistance, small business supports, pay premiums. The premium pay option, this is a specifically outlined option in the ARP to give money to essential workers. And then government services, that would be, it's actually something Louisville doesn't have a huge amount of, but you know, some cities' budgets were really hit hard by the pandemic and the economic fallout. And then there's water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Now, this is this last part, we've been basically waiting to see what happened with the federal infrastructure package that is hopefully very close to passing now, because essentially, if the infrastructure package didn't pass, then we were probably going to end up spending more of the ARP funds on water, sewer, and broadband. But if the infrastructure package does pass, we might be able to lean on that more for those very expensive but important things. So, and this is important at the end here. Use of funds must show a nexus to COVID-19. However, certain services are presumed eligible in qualified census tracts. So, in other words, let's take workforce, for example. The ARP guidelines are very specific that we cannot just run a general workforce program. It has to be a workforce program that helps people who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So for any proposed uses of ARP funds, you have to show that COVID-19 impact. However, there are some kind of catch-alls, and qualified census tracts are the biggest one of those. So these are HUD-designated census tracts that essentially the ARP guidelines are saying we're going to presume if somebody lives in one of these census tracts that they have been disproportionately impacted. That makes it a little bit easier for us. But as you can see, it's still not quite, I mean, you know, there's some census tracts that are sort of inexplicably not part of this map. Okay, what have we done so far? In phase 1 of the ARP process here in Louisville, Metro Council authorized $30 million of ARP funding. And it went to a handful of things: COVID-19 response, child care center emergency and safety supplies, suicide prevention, substance abuse and addiction assistance, eviction prevention, a lot of it went to that. Utilities assistance, a lot of it went to that. So about half of this 30 million was eviction prevention and utility assistance. I think 10 million was for COVID-19 response. And then these other things made up the rest of that $5 million. Food distribution and support, and community ambassadors. Which sort of focused on downtown, but was later broadened to include other neighborhoods. So what are our next steps? What are we doing now? Right now, we're trying to finalize those 7 priority areas that I outlined earlier. And that's why we're taking community input. And we want to make sure we have broad agreement on what those are. And then we're going to try to clearly define the problems we're trying to solve and what issues are contributing to them. Develop and prioritize solutions, seek community partnerships, collaboration. Then we'll get to the RFP stage. So once we've identified what are the problems we're trying to solve, what are the solutions we think we could pursue, there will be an RFP phase where we're actually putting out RFPs and asking for proposals and bidding out the work. And then the final phase is implementing solutions and making sure we comply with all of our requirements. So there is a general Louisville Accelerator team email address here. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, always feel free to email that. I'm one of, I think, 5 people at the moment who are spending a lot of time on this, but we're hiring a few more project manager type people. So we're going to have a bigger staff soon to handle the workload that's coming in. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
So you've got a number in the chat. Do you just want to roll down those areas
Sure.
and start addressing those?
Yeah.
There are quite a few questions that go around the notion of equity and how Louisville Metro is addressing that with the ARP funds. And then there's a question around tied to that, the size of organization and who gets what that relates to equity. So
Yeah, that's a good, so I'm glad you brought that up because it's something I needed to talk about anyway. So the size of the organization piece is a hurdle we're currently trying to figure out the best way to work around, because essentially the way the guidelines are written, it's an enormous amount of compliance work to take this ARP money. So it's not that it's too much work for most organizations. Most organizations do not have the bandwidth to actually take this ARP money. So we're trying to figure out what we can do about that, because it does have equity implications. And it's just also, you know, in a sense, these regulations were written in a way to try to steer this money towards the biggest projects with the largest institutional capacity. And some of them, you know, some of the money will be doing that, but if all the money is doing that, then it's going to leave a lot of people out. So that's an issue we're currently trying to figure out. Overall, with equity, we are evaluating every plan through an equity lens. We have the mayor's chief equity officer, who's Kendall Boyd, just recently left. I think he's currently in about a month of transition time between his current job as chief equity officer and his new job at LG&E. But at any rate, Kendall was part of the process. We're going to make sure that we have somebody who's always looking at the equity lens, and that we're evaluating all proposals through an equity lens and using the equity toolkit that Metro has when we actually get to the proposals. So it's very much baked into everything we're trying to do. And then, you know, if we go back to the big themes. Yeah. So these are all trying to address equity gaps in some way or another. So, for example, broadband, we know broadband is disproportionately unavailable to low-income households and households of color. So that's obviously a big focus when we're looking at what can we do about broadband and internet access.
All right, great. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think I didn't get some of the questions people were asking when my computer was throwing a fit. So if you want to just keep tossing them to me, Merv, I'll
Great. Yes.
do my best.
So I know Ashley had a couple of questions around there. Ashley, are there any other additional questions that you would like to ask as it relates to the equity issue? If so,
No, I know when it was presented to Metro Council, that was just a recommendation that equity be more clearly identified as a priority. Obviously equity should be a part of each one of the themes, but for it to not be clearly spelled out, people just don't want it to be lost or assume that it's there. My other question was just about, and I think there are a couple questions about potential timeline for next steps in terms of finalizing priorities, issuing RFPs, and then possible implementation and release of funds. I don't know if you'll have a timeline for that, but that's definitely a hanging question for a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. So we don't have a specific timeline yet. I think we are trying to wrap these themes up and get them finalized by early next month. And then, the other thing I should say is that ultimately this is a council process. Council is approving and allocating these funds. So that's why council has been leading on these budget hearings and these public meetings. And that's going to continue to be a really important part of the process. And then the accelerator team is essentially trying to figure out how to execute on these things and trying to help shape, the conversation, and make sure that we're getting input from everybody and that we build on the work we did with Build Back Better Together and identify all the pots of money. The other thing I should say, this $388 million, this is only one out of 56 different pots of money in the ARP. I think it's about an eighth of the total ARP. A lot of that money went to the state. A lot of it went to the $1,400 checks a lot of people got. But there are lots of other pots of money. There's some competitive grants, some block grants. So we'll be getting more money on top of this $388 million that has specific uses. And we'll be applying for some of these competitive grants that where it makes sense for the city to apply. Other competitive grants, we've worked with community partners to apply. So for example, JCPS is going to be applying for this E-rate money, which will help provide internet access to JCPS families. So that's something we're supporting. But that could be another, $16 million on top of what we've got here.
I see Keisha had her hand up. So Keisha, if you have a question, you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi Anne, hi Eric. Will the city and council, as you mentioned before, around being able to handle federal dollars, will council in the city be looking at partnerships with already established organizations like CDFIs that are designated to handle U.S. Treasury funds in partnership? So a portion of the funds being designated to those organizations in partnership. And have you all thought about that avenue of opportunity?
Yeah, great question. I don't know specifically about that question, and I don't know if council is specifically considering an allotment for CDFIs, but I definitely think we're going to have to lean on all of our community partners who are doing work in these fields. There's just, nobody has the capacity by themselves to handle this amount of money in this many priority areas. So, this is definitely an all hands on deck. We all have to work together to do a good job with this.
There also seems to be folks wanting to ask about specific, address specific issues around themes. There was one Mackenzie had about seniors as a priority theme. Is there anything being done in this area or as it relates to ARP funding?
I don't know of any specific projects that have been proposed, but you're certainly welcome to submit comments on the online forum. Council also has their own comment form process. And I will definitely relay this feedback as it relates to their themes.
All right, and then there's questions around affordable housing. Tony had some specific questions about that. Tony, if you want to elaborate on that, if you want to unmute yourself and ask that question.
Yeah, it was just more of a comment than a question, just to point out that there are many organizations who do research in these areas, and the map that he showed on qualified census tracts just mirror, race, ethnicity, where people live, individuals with disabilities, poverty, subsidized housing, evictions, utility disconnection. I mean, it's just a laundry list of issues. So I think it just brings the question back to the issue of equity, but it also brings it back to the issue of affordable housing really being a keystone issue that is represented here.
I would agree with that.
And then Kristen had a question around the timeline and collaboration. Kristen, did you get an answer to that question, or did you want to elaborate, ask for a follow-up?
I would just say, Eric, there were some early timelines that were shared about, potentially having an August 13th proposals due end of October, having full Metro Council final vote. Do you think that we're still on kind of a fall, and like by the end of October, having things in front of Metro Council for them to be ready to vote on, or do you think that's starting to be pushed out a little bit? How do you feel about the timeline?
I don't have a concrete answer on that, but I do think if we finalize these themes, say in a month, then we can start to fill in these other areas about, so if these are the themes, what are the problems? What are the contributing issues? What are potential solutions? I think that October timeframe could still be very much in play.
Okay. And then the other part of it was, as you think about, helping to either create, collaboration across organizations around these shared solutions, or building upon collaborations that are already, in place and are ready to be, kind of activated. How do you think about the accelerator team helping to drive that and helping to both, like I said, support, but also create? How are you all thinking about that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, one of the ways we've been trying to do that is to identify some of these other pots of money and how we can bring more money to the city, but also think about what cross sector partnerships we might have to get those funds and then to implement those funds. But then I think it's also, a question of what are the ideas that people have to, so let's say when we identify the problems, what are the ideas that our community partners have to solve those problems, and what's the, who has the best plan, or multiple partners have the best plans to address those problems. So I think it's still going to be a process, but like I said, we're going to have to lean on everybody to actually execute this amount of work. So I would say in general, Kristen, the process is very open and collaborative. And I think we're, early on with that phase one, we just did not have any time whatsoever to do this kind of process that we're doing now. So, and because it was the first thing, I think some people thought like that's how we're going to approach all of it. but it was honestly just because the guidelines came out in, I don't know, I think June or something. And we had 3 or 4 weeks between when the ARP guidance came out and council's vote before their recess. And we had to get stuff into council to get, basically to get on the docket. We had about 2 weeks, so we just didn't have any time. But we've had more time now, so that's why we're taking this. That's why we're doing these kinds of things and making sure that we get input from everybody and build back better together. That group of co-chairs was recently reconvened. We've been having these public meetings and we're taking everybody's comments. So I think we'll have a much better sense of what community consensus is and also who might be able to do what. But eventually it's going to be this, this RFP process.
Well, I think that makes great sense. I do, certainly your partners here with around with CNPE, with your philanthropic partners, they are working across public, private often. And so I think to be able to maybe even utilize some of CNPE's, whether it's the community activated network or other kind of cross streams, you have a lot of this collaboration happening. And so if there are ways that, we can continue as CNP helping to provide the forums for that, so that instead of having RFPs where individual organizations are trying to drive, to an RFP, doing some of that kind of shared, crafting of those plans in the beginning could be really helpful. And you've got some really strong organizations, both public and private, on all sides that that are kind of ready and excited to do that. So that sounds great. Thanks for that.
Yeah. No, those are all great points. And I'll also give Anne a shout out. I mean, she's been a great advocate and we'll definitely just say what needs to be said. So if you have anything that you need to relay and it doesn't seem to be getting through, you can always relate to Anne.
Now this is, go ahead, Murph.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to ask Eric there, not to get us off this topic, because I think there's a lot of great questions, but there are lots of other buckets of funding.
Yeah.
Can you just touch on that for a moment and the thinking right now about how that intersects and will embellish? Yeah.
So most of the other buckets of funding that came through the ARP that are relevant to us are through state block grants. So we'll be getting some portion of it. So for example, we got $11 million in home funds that can be used for affordable housing. So there's money like that in affordable housing, childcare, maybe water and sewer down the line. But we don't really have any control over how much we're getting. And then the funding is going to go to existing channel, the people who get the state money through block grants are going to get the state money through block grants. Then there's the competitive grant bucket. Once we got down to it, there really aren't that many competitive grants in the ARP actually. I think there were about 16 altogether. And then I want to say 12 of them either were not relevant to Louisville or were not something the city could apply for. And then a handful are relevant and are things we can apply for. Some of those are still relatively small, but there's a grant that the EDA just put out, the Economic Development Administration just put out 6 grants out of a $3 billion pot of the ARP funds. 4 of them I think we could apply for. And one of them is specific to tourism. So, that's where, we're really playing a kind of facilitator role. But the other 3 may be very relevant to economic development priorities. One of them is called the Build Back Better, Build Back Better Regional Challenge. So it's even got the name that we're using. So anyway, that could end up being another $25 to $75 million to support workforce development initiatives. And some, a lot of the work we've been doing on either advanced manufacturing or digital upskilling and data analytics. So we're looking, actually, we should be putting in a press release maybe today or tomorrow with U of L about how we're going to approach that. So that'll have its own kind of side public process, in addition to this big process for the 388 million. But the rest of the grants are really just kind of formulaic. And then again, the biggest X factor that we've had this whole time as we've been trying to figure out what to do with the ARP money is what's going to happen with the infrastructure package. Because if the infrastructure package doesn't pass and we don't have any more money for broadband out of that, we're definitely going to have to spend some money from the ARP on broadband. As it looks right now, the infrastructure package hasn't passed, but it's looking pretty good. It's looking much better than it's been looking. And so if things hold up the way they look right now, we should be getting, $65 billion in there for broadband, probably 55 billion for wastewater infrastructure, probably 50 billion for clean drinking water. I think it's 70 billion for power grid infrastructure. So there are a lot of really great priorities in there that should free up some of the ARP money to be devoted to other things. Unfortunately, though, there was in the original Biden plan, there was, I think, 100 billion of affordable housing money in the infrastructure package, and that did not make it through the bipartisan process. So I think the Democrats are going to try to pass that in their next round, the $3.5 trillion Democratic budget priority bill that they're going to try to get through reconciliation, but big question mark of whether Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema will support that. Anyway, that's all getting in the weeds of the politics, but yeah, we're still watching a lot of these developments.
So Eric, is there a way, is this posted anywhere on the mayor's website, or is there a way that we can sort of follow and track this evolution?
With the infrastructure package? No, I mean, all of that is, like, we only know what you all know if you read the news. So we're just following it like everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, all the funds. I mean, is there any type of dashboard where it's just sort of being tracked in the public?
Working towards that. We aren't there yet, but that's what some of the work of these new project managers we're bringing on board should help with. And I should say the other thing is, for those of you who are representing foundations, we're working on getting something in place where we can do kind of a dashboard for that, where we can see how we're layering public and philanthropic dollars.
All right, we've got quite a few questions here. So folks, I'll do my best to kind of summarize them, but Harrison and Micah had questions around reporting requirements. And then after that, I'll go with Val around her question around eviction. And then Sonia also had the question. So those are the next three that we're going to take. And then we'll go through as many as we can. So Eric, there are questions around reporting requirements. So historically, they've been quite burdensome, making it difficult, especially for smaller organizations. What are Metro's thoughts around getting, helping out with that, getting around that? Is there a way to help small organizations manage that reporting requirements? They seem to be a huge obstacle and hurdle for many.
Yeah, no, I agree. I hear that, and we are aware of it. I don't have a great answer for it yet. And in fact, the ARP reporting requirements are apparently much worse than the CARES Act reporting requirements were. So yeah, it's frustrating, honestly. It's not something that's in our control. So we're trying to figure out some creative solutions for it. And as soon as we think we have one, absolutely we'll communicate that. But we're not there yet. I wish I had a better answer. Sorry.
All right, thank you. And Val had a question about eviction prevention. Val, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So I understand that there's a serious backlog at Metro Louisville staff with eviction assistance applications, that a lot of applications have been taken in. They are not getting processed to such an extent that some of the nonprofits that have been trying to assist with gathering applications and helping people complete them have stopped because the backlog has gotten so big. And I'm just wondering, this is like COVID related, a real serious crisis directly related to housing, and losing an affordable place to live. It's really hard to find another one. So I'm wondering, can't ARP money be allocated either to help Metro Louisville staff up quickly, or to subcontract out to competent nonprofits that could help process these applications?
Yeah, great question. So about half of the money that was allocated in that first 100 days part was going towards affordable housing and eviction prevention. I say affordable housing. There's really eviction prevention and utility assistance, because we have as you probably know, we have a backlog of people who are behind on their utility bills, which is one of the leading indicators that somebody might be in trouble of potentially getting evicted. So those have absolutely been top priorities from the beginning, continue to be top priorities. Every conversation we've had has involved affordable housing in some way. So it's clearly a top community priority. I think council members are very aware of it too. So we have given some money in this first part to help with some of those concerns. Marilyn Harris, the city's housing director, has been very involved and very helpful. That's a big part of why we got the 10 million in that first round. So I don't know the specifics for you, Val, on exactly what Marilyn is looking at doing and how those funds are getting distributed, but I know it was very much like she's aware of all of these things, like stopmyeviction.org, had to go offline for a couple of weeks because there was a funding lapse. All those things that is really just about honestly the timing. Again, we essentially we didn't get the ARP money until pretty late in the process. So there were things that we would have liked to have done that we couldn't do, or we couldn't do as soon as we would have liked. For example, if we got the money earlier, we would have done more with summer programs for youth, but we just didn't have the money and time to do that. So anyway, yeah, housing is very important, and it's something we're very aware of.
And I appreciate that answer. And I guess my question is very specific. There is a backlog, and we know where the backlog is. It's in Metro Louisville. The applications are there, they're completed, they're pending, the money is there. The gap is that Metro Louisville doesn't have enough people committed to staff this. What's the plan to address that? That's my question.
I don't have an answer for that, but I'm happy to relay it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Sonia had a question earlier around children, youth, and family. Sonia, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Merv. Thank you, Ann, and also Eric. So I'm looking at the themes here, and around healthy neighborhoods, public safety, youth development, and education. And also I had seen where you had already allocated dollars for suicide prevention. My question and also comment is, Kentucky's been #1 for 3 years in a row with having the highest child abuse rates in the nation. And so what are the plans, or has it been reviewed to really look at adverse childhood experiences? There was just a big launch yesterday for Bloom Kentucky that will help identify victimization for kids, which were isolated due to COVID. I work for an organization where we go into the classroom and educate kids about body safety and internet safety. And we know that kids have been out of school for over 1.5 years. And we are very concerned about what type of disclosures are going to come out in the classroom once kids are around safe adults more often. But has there been any idea or thought around the allocation of preventative dollars?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that that's specifically come up. It's clearly in the ARP guidelines as an allowable cost. So, I would encourage you to submit a comment on the comment form with us in council, and contact your council members that you think can be advocates, and continue to advocate for that. Makes a lot of sense. We're also, I should say, trying to coordinate closely with JCPS. JCPS got at least as much money as we did. And they've given out a lot of it in the form of teacher bonuses, teacher retention bonuses. But they have, I want to say, I just looked at this morning, but I don't remember what the number is. But millions of dollars a year for the next 3 years, kind of targeted towards student well-being. So I think that would be a natural area where we could overlap.
Yeah, and thank you for your comment. And I guess what my concern is that we are allocating dollars for suicide prevention, which is great, but are we peeling back the layers as to why kids are wanting to commit suicide, which that goes back down to whatever type of experience that they had as a child, or if they have been compromised by an adult and have been abused, as to why some of these things are arising, why they want to commit suicide, cyberbullying, other things to that nature. We also know that it also plays a big role with domestic violence, healthy relationships, and community violence. So really just trying to put it on the forefront, of at least exploring the idea around adverse childhood experiences and the health equity that is produced from that, or the health inequities that are produced with kids that have been abused.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I think I'm happy to relay this, and I think the more channels you can get that message into, the better.
Great, thank you. Kathy had a question about I think it's a grant allocation. Kathy, do you want to unmute yourself and elaborate on your question?
Yeah. Hi, Eric. I'm just curious if the team is starting to think in terms of a minimum. So you'll probably get a lot of requests from organizations with smaller asks, but I think we're thinking big. So have you all been thinking in terms of starting at a certain point when you give the funds away?
No, we haven't gotten to that level. I mean, I think in terms of practicality, kind of part of the answer to the question we were talking about earlier about small organizations is we're going to have to figure out a way to consolidate some of the small organizations under a larger financial umbrella, but it still doesn't really get around the problem of the reporting requirements, because then the subgrant, say we give money to a larger nonprofit and we give money to a smaller nonprofit, the smaller nonprofit still has the same reporting requirements. So the short answer to your question is no, we haven't gotten that far. The longer question is, or the longer answer is, I think it's part of this, this bigger conversation about how do we want to allocate funds, and then how do those funds get distributed. I think part of the solution may be to think of things in terms of a vendor relationship more than a subgrantee relationship. So we could say hire some nonprofits to perform services rather than subgrant money to nonprofits. But we're still trying to work through all that.
All right, folks, if you have any other specific questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. There was a question around Paris Green project, wondering about the eligibility for ARP funds to turn city-owned and vacant property into a thriving multi-generational community. Any thoughts on that?
I don't have any specific thoughts on that, but you're more than welcome to submit it in the public comment process as a suggestion. And again, as these themes get solidified, we'll then be developing problem statements and contributing issues.
Hi, Eric. This is John Hunsker with Underhill Associates. I was the one that submitted my comment. I apologize. I joined late, but as soon as I joined, you were discussing some of these themes for the ARPA funding. And I just go back to our project, which based on these themes here, I think hits 3 of the 7 themes identified, which is affordable housing, healthy neighborhoods, and sustainability. And I'm just curious how knowledgeable you are on our Paristown Green project, and just based on your expertise, if you think it could be eligible for ARPA funding.
I don't have a specific thought on that. And, again, the specific project part of it will come later. That'll be more in the RFP stage, but, so say you have a project that you think solves some of the problems that will be identified in these areas, like affordable housing. Then you would just want to look for the RFPs when they come out. That you can contribute as a citizen to the process of developing these themes and developing the questions and the problems we're working on. But then if you have a specific project, that'll be something that gets vetted through this RFP process later.
Great, thank you, Eric. Joel had a question earlier, so I'm calling on Joel if he can unmute himself and ask his question.
Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Merv. Thank you so much. And Eric, thank you so much for taking your time to answer some of our questions. I noticed the themes that were listed below. So my question is, will priority be given to organizations whose missions align with the priority themes, or will funding go to specific projects or general operating support? I know that was a thing a lot of nonprofits were wondering in terms of sustainability and existing through the pandemic, on whether or not these would go to general operating. And finally, will the funds be given straight out, or will they be reimbursements like other ARP funds? I know that we receive funds from the Kentucky Humanities, and I know that the NEA, with their ARP funds, do reimbursements in terms of general operating. So I was just wondering those questions, and also if the process was similar to the EAF funds that we usually apply for. I know it's a loaded question. Thank you, Eric.
So I don't have an answer for your last question. The reimbursement part, yes, it is a reimbursement, which is another one of these hurdles for smaller organizations, right? So that's part of that thing that we're working on, trying to figure out solutions to. And then as for specific projects, I think it's too early for that.
So would these funds be able to go for general operating, or that's just my question?
You know what? That's a great question that I don't know off the top of my head. I think part of it can, but then but that would be more an OMB question. I'm happy to follow up on that for you.
No worries. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your questions today. We're about at time, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ann to close us out.
Thank you, Merv. Well, first of all, thanks everybody for your great questions and for participating today. Eric, I appreciate you managing through a busted computer and getting back online quickly and joining us. I know these were a lot of tough questions.
You guys are a great audience. What an informed group of questioners.
Well, and it's as we've talked about, Eric, so in a few weeks, we'll do this again when we know more. Is that right?
Yep.
We can reconvene. So everybody look for that. CMP is happy to convene these types of learning events, and we'll continue to do this. Remember, please be a member if you're not a member, and keep your questions coming, and wishing each of you a good day, and to be sure to take care of yourself and each other. So more soon. Thanks, everyone.